and welcome to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Alex, Sophie, Raf, and Mo. Where in the world is everyone coming from today?
London in the UK.
Australia. Melbourne.
Jersey, baby.
I'm from Central Ohio in the US.
I'm in New Mexico.
So, contrary to what has been believed for a really, really long time, that BPD is not a treatable disorder, it's actually like a good prognosis diagnosis. We have a lot of evidence that BPD can effectively be treated. We're going to talk about a bunch of those different treatments today, and what makes a really good treatment for BPD.
Well, Alex, I'm excited that you're with us on this episode in particular because for those of you who don't know, Alex is a therapist and she's studying to get her PhD in clinical psychology. So she's going to be hopping in and adding some additional context and knowledge to sort of round out all of our stories of lived experience. As Alex said, there are tons of evidence-based treatments out there for borderline personality disorder, and sometimes getting access to those treatments is still a challenge. So Mo is on this episode to sort of be that beacon of hope that it is possible to recover, even if you didn't have access to a BPD specific treatment. So Mo, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
The thing that made me want to get treatment or get help in the first place was I had just gotten out of an abusive relationship and I had no idea who I was or what to do because my identity relied on that person. So I started looking into Buddhism because I felt overly attached to that person. I could not let them go. And Buddhism teaches you to detach yourself from material things or things that are not your own. That's really what got me through. And that's what motivated me to start changing the way I think and changing the way I behave. It's not specifically Buddhism itself that helped me, but it's just the teachings of Buddhism. So you don't have to practice it if that's not your thing.
So how do you use some of these principles now? Like, do you have an example of like something in your daily life now that you would use like one of these teachings to kind of manage?
If somebody hurts my feelings, I still feel hurt and rejected. I still feel intense sadness, but usually I'm able to separate that person and their stuff and realize that no matter what their intentions of them, like when they hurt my feelings. Maybe they intended to, maybe they didn't, but that's on them. That's really what I try to remind myself is if someone hurts me, it's not about me per se. It's usually something going on with them. And if it is because of me, then they can talk to me. And if they choose not to talk to me and try to resolve the issue, then again, that's their problem. I can't resolve anything in our friendship or relationship if I'm not even aware of it.
I love that you really focused on Buddhism and you talk about non-attachment, which I think is so important because with BPD, we have this usually a tendency to have these really intense attachments to everything and anyone who we're close to. And it becomes so hard because it kind of makes it like everything then becomes about us. Everything anyone says, like you said, it's not about you, it's on them. The more you attach to something, the more you think about it and overthink about it, it just becomes so painful. And I think that's a reason why a lot of us have a hard time letting go.
I'm a practicing Buddhist. It definitely centers me in the sense that like when you chant, we place a lot of emphasis on like enlightenment and bringing out your Buddha nature. It allows you to see people in a very loving and kind way, or like to understand that like suffering is something that is inevitable. So I definitely feel like Buddhism has been a massive part of like my recovery journey, because whenever I chant, I just find a new way to deal with life. It just sometimes comes out of nowhere and I'm like, that's the way to navigate that situation.
I love that, Sophie. And I think people can get that through prayer as well,
Absolutely.
If that's more of your thing. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like when you meditate, when you focus, it brings moments of clarity, and it's such a relief.
Right, like just being able to get in a zone where you are able to clear your mind, whether it's tapping into your own body by doing yoga or whatever you're doing, and then somehow you just get a moment of clarity.
Living mindfully.
There you go.
One of the most impactful things for me about mindfulness is the idea of paying attention to the moment with intention. I always take for granted how much of a difference it makes, but really it's just, if I wake up, I pay attention to how I'm feeling in my body. Like, if I'm just paying attention to myself, then everything else is easier. But that's hard to maintain. It's a simple practice, but you have to practice it all the time. And I think that's the part about mindfulness that's challenging, is that it has to become a habit to really stick. And I am just one of those people that loves to overcomplicate and overthink things. So I keep trying to outthink it and be like, oh, there will be someday if I just think hard enough, I'll land on something and then I won't have to work anymore.
Yeah.
It also is a really good segue to talk about DBT too, because DBT was born out of Marsha Linehan's training, and she was a Buddhist monk, and she realized a lot of people with BPD, or like extremely suicidal people, had a really hard time meditating, because it is really hard when there's like a lot of bad thoughts going on. It's hard to just say like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and meditate my BPD away, but it is really, really hard. So she figured out these ways of incorporating meditation techniques, mindfulness techniques into daily life. And that's the core of what DBT is the first thing you learn is these mindfulness techniques, because the idea is that you can't really know when to use the other techniques until you understand mindfulness. So in DBT, the very first thing you learn is mindfulness. Then you learn another module, like maybe you'll learn interpersonal effectiveness, but then you go back to mindfulness to relearn those skills, because they're so important. It's learning how to pay attention to the present moment, pay attention to what's going on inside your body, and then it teaches you how to do that. When I started DBT, I had really horrible generalized anxiety, and especially when I was on the subway, I would take the subway every day to go to DBT. And I would really practice my mindfulness skills on the subway. So I would notice the tightness in my chest and just notice it. Don't put any judgment to it. Be curious about it. Where is this coming from? Like, there's no threat around me. And just not judging myself for feeling that way. It was so weird. One day it just melted away.
DBT gets its name from dialectical, is the word, dialectical behavior therapy. And the idea is a synthesis of two seemingly opposing ideas. So the concept that we are doing the best that we can and we can do better. So it's not a but, it's an and, which it makes them, they're on equivalent footing. Two seemingly opposing things can be true at once. The reason why dialectics are so important, particularly for people who struggle with BPD, is that we tend to think of things in very black or white terms, where it's either all or nothing. And the idea of dialectics can help us to think about things in a more balanced way.
There's really just a number of different components. So the idea is that you're getting individual therapy where you're able to kind of practice these things with a therapist, but the big part is the skills training group. So that's where you learn all the skills. It's kind of like even like class-based in a way. Like, it's a lot of learning and learning the skills and practicing the skills. Homework's a big part of it. And then there's also a part of it where you have phone coaching, that's where it's like, it can be very hard to practice these skills in real life. So the idea of phone coaching, it basically allows you to be able to generalize these skills from the therapy room to real life. So if you're having a hard time doing that yourself, you are able to just, if you're having a very hard moment, to call up your therapist and say, I'm having a really hard time. I don't know what to do right now. Can you help me with a skill? And that can be super, super helpful. The therapist also kind of has a team that helps support them and helps to make sure that the patient is always getting the best treatment, they're seeing their patient dialectically and in a balanced way. Then there's the 4 modules that you learn when you're in group. Like I said before, you learn mindfulness, you learn skills to help you regulate your emotions, so emotion regulation skills. There's also interpersonal effectiveness skills. A lot of people with BPD have a lot of interpersonal difficulties, so that's supposed to be helpful there. And then the stress tolerance, which are the skills that, you use when you're at a very high emotional state to help you kind of just get through that moment. Learning all these different skills, eventually over time, the idea is that you practice them so much that they just become second nature. I mean, at this point, I don't usually sit around and think, oh, I'm using this skill or that skill. Sometimes I do, but it's just like, it just becomes a way of life, a different way of seeing the world and being in the world.
So if anyone has seen the Diagnosis Stories episode, you know that it took me 15 years basically from diagnosis to actually doing a DBT program. And 8 of those years, I thought I'd already done DBT because I was in a step down program where they handed out some DBT sheets and were like, here you go, this is DBT. I didn't know that phone coaching was a thing. I didn't know that individual one-on-one practice with a therapist was a thing. And so part of why we're having this conversation is just to let you know what, an adherent program is for DBT and what some of these other programs can look like. That's not to say you can't get use out of, DBT skills handouts, but there are going to be people out there, and I was definitely one of them, where I really needed a very hands-on approach with someone who understood me. It took me a really long time to find a therapist who I felt like actually understood what I was saying when I was talking to her.
Honestly, the most important thing about finding treatment for BPD is that you find a therapist who understands BPD and wants to be treating people with BPD. It's, it sucks to go to a therapist and then they say, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that problem. You could avoid that by taking a little bit of extra time to find someone who you make sure before you go there has, worked with people with BPD and has an interest in doing so. There's another type of treatment called general or good psychiatric management, which came out of McLean Hospital in Massachusetts. And the idea is that it's not even so much the skills that are taught or, the specific content of the treatment. The idea is that clinicians need to be trained in treating BPD. So they receive training, and it's like a much more easy training to go through because it's more general. It incorporates a lot of different types of therapy, but it's the core of it is that the clinician is a skilled BPD clinician. They know how to treat BPD, or they know the inner workings of BPD. How about you guys that have done other treatments? What have that been like?
Mine's been interesting. So I've done like talk therapy, a little bit of CBT, stuff like that for like the last couple of years. And my my psychologist at this point, we'd been together for a while. She recommended Schema therapy because it basically allows you to get an internal map of how you implicitly see the world that's coming into you. So you want to look in deeply and find those core fundamental beliefs that you have internally that you may very much be unaware of. These beliefs can be like pretty like limiting and, at its extremes, pretty harmful. But yeah, the idea is like these core fundamental beliefs throughout your childhood, they end up being usually as a result of some sort of like emotional neglect or basically a core emotional need not being fulfilled. And that fundamental belief that is then instilled in you kind of filters every single input, every single experience that goes into you. What Schema therapy has allowed me to do anyway is find out what those filters are.
What are some of your schemas that you've come to realize that you haven't, and how does that affect how you view the world or like different situations?
So my major one is self-sacrifice, emotional deprivation, and unrelenting standards. So I sat down with a therapist, all that sort of stuff, and they've gave me a map of my schemas, or the ones that are, the most extreme. Self-sacrifice basically being, I've got this one here, belongs to the schema domain of other directedness. So it typically develops in children whose parents are weak or ill or appear helpless. The parents might be physically weak due to conditions, depressed, or acting in a childlike manner. This schema is characterized by the belief that you should put others' needs before your own needs. Not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do. At an extreme, what it can kind of push you to do is completely lose all of your boundaries and effectively overcare and over try to nourish somebody else. You get your sense of fulfillment through what you can do for the other people But while this is happening, because you've got that filter, you don't realize you're neglecting your own needs, and it turns into resentment or anger because you feel like you're not getting anything back.
Yes.
But the issue is you kind of over exaggerate the helplessness of people around you. You need to do this thing. You need to give more. You need to constantly be doing that. But in reality, that actually isn't there. I've got this self-sacrifice schema in front of me that's made me think that is necessary. Now, realistically, self-sacrifice, that sort of thing, isn't a bad thing when it's controlled.
Right.
But when that's the only way that you can see the world, that self-sacrifice gets blown out to an extreme, and it can develop into some really unhealthy lifestyle, unhealthy relationships.
A schema is the belief, or like what part?
I can explain.
Yeah, probably.
What a schema is when you go through life, you have a lot of experiences which kind of mold the way you see the world. Schemas are like things inside of us where we kind of categorize information, like input. So if something's happening in our lives, we rely on these schemas or ways of viewing ourselves or the world to help us kind of make sense of everything going on around us. So if we have a schema like an abandonment schema where we might feel like people are going to be leaving us all the time, we might take in information. Let's say you're having a fight with someone. We might view that as a sign that they're going to leave us. Because we have shaped the way that we view situations based on, our experiences. And it makes sense because, everyone is a giant compilation of every experience they've ever had in their lives. And I mean, it's not always the best thing when it becomes so, rigid, like when these schemas become so strong, because then you don't really have another way of looking at it. And I think the idea of schema therapy is to like kind of break down some of these schemas, especially the unhealthy ones.
I think I kind of really liked schema therapy because it kind of gave me a roadmap, or at least a map to what might be filtering my experiences and what might be causing me to act in a certain way, whether it's either feeling this intense rejection or wanting to enmesh myself in someone else's life. There's an analogy I thought of before. The map of after schema therapy is kind of like a map of a minefield, like where those mines might be out in the field. And it's not a perfect map. It could, some things might not be there. Sometimes a mine or an area will be bigger than on other days. It'll be directly related to my emotional state at that point. But it gives me an idea of where those mines might be. And with that information, it's helped me further in therapy where I can try to find where that mine or where that schema came from. And I think people kind of call it shadow work or something like that, where you see what it is, you find out where it may have came from, and then you start investigating that with your therapist and talking through that. It's amazing because it's helped me get through a lot of things and actually process it, but it's hard. The last session before, it was just 50 minutes of me just crying, just finally nailing down what it was that made these things, a certain behavior happen, and then having to just approach it. It's brutal, but the feeling afterwards was just like someone took 20 kilos, a 20 kilo backpack or a 50-pound backpack off my back. That's
pretty much a similar theme throughout most BPD treatments. It's and they talk about the only way out is through. Only way of getting out of the pain is going through the pain. We're not going to go around it. We're not going to do a cutesy little dance around the pain and be happy at the end. We have to figure out the difficult things that we have to face in ourselves to be able to get over them. It's painful, but once you get through, like you said, it's like taking that weight off your back. You got to accept it too. Because if you're no, that's not my problem. It's not me, it's them. You have to be aware and to be you're right. I need to change.
Yeah, sometimes it can be a little bit daunting because it's just oh God, why is there so many things on my map? And then it's no, make it blurry again. It was kind of nicer when it was just a blurry bunch of dots. But you start working through it and it really does help. I think what I found interesting, I'm finding what Mo and Soph were saying as far as enabling yourself to kind of get in more peaceful zone, in a more like relaxed Zen zone to allow fixes to happen. I'm kind of feeling that resonate with me now, because it does get to a point where constantly looking at a map of the minefield gets tiring. And it's just like, I just need a way to be able to just, while I like see this, but instead of constantly looking at it and constantly finding the best way to go, just allow my brain to unlock a way to go.
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up. Because it's so, sometimes it's like, for some people it takes multiple different treatments, or, you know, there's like one thing might help in one area but not in another. And something that's so important to realize too is like, what symptoms do you have that might fit a certain treatment better than the other? And there's still research to be done on this, still like research that has been done, but you know, figuring out which is the best for you it's like really important, because it's like, yeah, you can do all this work and you can realize in a moment, oh, you know, that's my self-sacrifice schema coming up again. But it's like, then it's helpful to maybe also have something else as well to help you get through that moment. Let's hear about MBT.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into MBT, actually. Mentalization-based therapy. It allows you to think about thinking. You find ways to make sense of your thoughts. And in doing that, you try to match your thoughts to your actions and behaviors. So the programs can run between 12 months and 18 months. I was on the 18-month program. Definitely needed. You have group therapy. There were about 6 of us in our group. And then you have one-to-one therapy every 2 weeks. And people come in at different times, just like DBT. So seeing people come in when you're like month 9 or something in the group therapy, and then seeing someone come in on month 1, they're kind of like, I don't want to talk to these people. Who the hell are, like, what's going on here? I have trust issues, blah, blah, blah. And seeing them like go through the treatment, where you're just speaking about things and kind of initiating them into the group. There's no structure, which pisses everyone off when they first come, because they're like, it pissed me off anyway, alongside everybody else. What is happening here? What are we supposed to be doing? Is there no structure? Is there like not CBT skills or something that we're going to learn? And the facilitators were like, okay, so why do you want there to be structure? And you just want to punch them in the throat, because you come there and you're lost and you just want someone to give you answers, but you have to literally figure it out. And by the facilitators asking questions and things, the group kind of progresses in a way that forms its own culture, and things start to work together well, because you find yourself being a facilitator at different times. Like, everyone is there sort of, you know, offering support and asking the right questions. And sometimes it goes wrong, and I feel like those are the best times to learn in these groups, when things go wrong, because it's a reflection of the world outside. Because you're not going to get on with everyone, are you? So when someone really rubs you up the wrong way, or they ask you the wrong question, the facilitators are kind of there to like make it a clean fight, if you like, because they ask the right questions.
What kinds of questions do they ask?
So why do you think that she was feeling that way? Or how do you know that she was feeling that way? And it's like, because I know. But how do you know? Because I know them and I know. They just probe to get to the bottom of why it is that there's evidence to what you're saying that you feel like you really know.
It's almost like the therapist or the other group members are like helping train the higher self in your own mind, so that later on when you leave, your higher self is able to ask you these questions. Is that how that works?
Yeah, definitely. Because when I first got to the groups, I was in quite a bad state and quite selfish, actually. Because you come to the group and everyone's supposed to bring whatever's going on in their lives, right? And some people, like, I thought I talk a lot, but there's honestly, like, gosh, some people would come and just dominate the whole time. And it made me understand that that's irritating when I do it. So I had to kind of really learn to give space to other people. But before that, because I was in a horrible state, I was kind of like, I'm not coming next week because I don't have time to come and listen to other people when I've got my own stuff to deal with. And they were like, okay, so, you know, there are the questions again. How how do you think that it might help you if you came to these groups and heard what people are saying? Or like, what does this show you about yourself? I'm thinking, well, it shows me that I don't need to be at these groups, doesn't it? But after a while, you think, oh gosh, you know, you're making space for other people and learning that when something triggers you, you need to stay with it and understand yourself through that, right? So yeah, that helped. And then I became one of the bloody facilitators, didn't I? Yeah, I'd say it definitely taught me a lot to like be in solidarity with people, offer support and reassurance, and to slow things down for myself as well. Like, and not to be so sure about what's going on in other people's heads, and not to be so fixated on my own things that are going on in my mind. Like, emotions can just be emotions and thoughts can just be thoughts. The end.
So I want to go back and explain a little bit about what you're talking about too, is that like being sure. First, I want to explain really what mentalizing is. Mentalizing is such a cool concept that's not, you know, I think it's just really awesome to think about. Mentalizing is the ability to understand your own and other people's mental states. So when I say mental states, I mean like understanding what other people are thinking, what they're feeling, you know, maybe what their motivations are, their goals, and also the in yourself too. Like we have to be able to mentalize our own feelings, our own thoughts, and understand what's going on within ourselves. A lot of what Sophie described of like that being sure, like I know what they're thinking, like I just know. That's called hypermentalization. That's called hypermentalizing. It's when you feel like you really know. And a lot of us with BPD, we're very sensitive to like external cues, like facial expressions and things like that. So it's like we feel like based on these things, we know. Based on what I know about this person, I know what they're thinking. I know that they have bad intentions in this moment. I know that they were out to get me in that moment. And it's to really what Sophie's explaining is slowing it down and saying, how do you know that? Like, how do you really know that? And it's challenging yourself. And that's also a painful, difficult thing, because your whole life or over the course of your life, you become so certain about certain things. And it's like, really like, oh, I guess I don't really know. And kind of coming back to a place where your mentalizing is healthy and you can question whether or not what someone else is thinking and not just assume that you know for fact. It's cool, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Although very, very difficult to do, especially with the closest relationships to you. Because you think, I know that person and I know. No, you don't. No, you don't know. You don't know.
Yeah. It breaks down in the closest relationships. That's what, research really shows, is that, close attachments, when we're very attached to someone, it's called like hyperactivation, like of our, you're on edge, you're seeking out things that might be, threatening to you. And so it's like, that's when you start to really think, like, I know what they're thinking. I know. And it can be really difficult.
And in one-to-one therapy, like when you're coming in and you're breaking down about something that your partner did and you know that they were out to get you, and the therapist is like, but how do you know that? How do you know what they were thinking? You literally want to punch them because you feel like you know. Of course you do. You share a bed with this person. Like, you just want to you just feel like that's like, and like they're antagonizing you. that was like the hardest part of therapy, honestly. Like just being challenged all the time and them turning it back around on you and saying, okay, so why do you think that affects you so much? And you're kind of like...
This reminds me of something that I think, I don't remember if I learned it in school or in DBT or both, but this idea of like, you can't view another person's intentions. You can only view their external behavior. Which may signal an intention, but an intention is something that exists only inside someone's own mind. You can only see evidence of an intention, not the intention itself. And that is something that I feel like is a lifelong process to try to balance, right? Because like the pitfall for me has been, if I am like, oh, I can't see people's intentions, then the tendency is to be like, well, then I'll just ignore the red flags because they don't mean anything. And so when I say find a balance, I mean you got to be cautious to be like, okay, people are giving me signals, and not completely ignoring them because they're still communicating something to you. It's just also recognizing that you cannot view the intention and trying to figure out what is happening that is my interpretation of someone's behavior, and what are they actually trying to communicate to me. And that is one of the, I'm still working on that today.
That's
you know,
so-
and it's,
I love
That
that you
hurts
brought
my
that
brain.
up. Because what you just described is actually the opposite. There's like different modes of mentalizing, or different, you know, the one you just described of that not, you know, not seeing the signs, not wanting to like try to figure out what someone's thinking. That's called hypo-mentalizing. And I think people with BPD tend to do more of the hyper-mentalizing, but there are situations where, and a lot of people with BPD can be very naive, very trusting of other people. And this is because a lot of times we fail to try to see someone else's motives or figure that out. Or maybe we don't want to know, you know, we just want to be trusting. We want to be loved. So we're in that moment. It's like, oh, this person's showing me love, but maybe they're going to take advantage of me. It's like why a lot of us end up in abusive relationships. There's research that shows that people with BPD are more likely to end up in abusive relationships. So it's that kind of ignoring of the red flags. It's the not thinking about someone else's mental states. Or trusting your own.
Wow. I'm thinking back to like my last 2 like abusive relationships, for lack of a better word, and just seeing like the difference between like the hypo and the hyper being so heavy at the start of them, and then towards the end trying to do it, like trying to figure it out to the other nth degree. Like I've never heard it explained like that, and now that it's
so cool.
yeah, and now it's just like, holy shit, if someone could have told me that like a year ago, dope. But like, you know.
Because also that attachment's building too. You know, at the beginning, that's not, you know, your attachment's not as strong too. And you tend to hypermentalize more as the attachment gets stronger. But also, I mean, there's also something in abusive relationships that evokes that strong attachment too, right? Like, like you've been playing with me for so long, don't leave me. It's even though there are some other therapies too that I'm sure we're missing, like there's a therapy called Steps. It's a group therapy. It's also like teaches you a lot of like different skills and also just a lot of psychoeducation about BPD. But there is an important therapy that none of us have done called Transference focused therapy. So this is what's called a psychodynamic treatment. The idea is that people with BPD, like we talked before about like very splitting kind of thinking, the black or white, all or nothing. And with our identities, there's something called identity diffusion. So we have these kind of identities that are kind of split off. Like we either see ourselves as all good one moment or all bad one moment, and maybe the same as other people too. Like it's hard to see a person as one coherent, integrated person. We really tend to split people off or split ourselves off into different areas. So you'll see a patient come in one week and talk about how amazing this person in their life is, and then the next week they come in and say how horrible they are, and some things like that. Like you kind of try to confront those things. Like if no one's going to bring that up to you, you're not likely to even realize how different your views can be. The whole goal of this therapy is to bring the person back to an integrated self. So being able to hold oneself as all the different components that make up who you are at the same time. And the idea is that through being able to do this, then you kind of be able to regulate your own emotions. You know, it's interesting, all the different treatments for BPD get us to the same place, but through different ways. So like for DBT, a lot of it's managing the emotions. And through managing the emotions, the idea is that we will develop a stronger sense of identity. TFP is kind of the opposite. It's trying to, you know, integrate your identity in order to get a handle on all the other parts of your life. So the biggest thing about TFP is that it really focuses on the here and now. And it focuses a lot on the relationship between the therapist and the patient. The idea is whatever is going on there is going to represent a way that the person sees other people in their lives. A lot of people might either see the therapist as like this all good, loving person, and then maybe on another time they might see the therapist as like this critical, you know, person who's never going to accept them. So it's how they see them. And then it also focuses on the therapist being very aware of how they're feeling towards the patient, because the idea is that whatever you feel towards a patient is likely what other people in their lives feel about them too. Like the things that they bring up in you, like if you feel really frustrated by a patient because they're just, not listening to you, or they're getting mad at you for little things, it's likely that other relationships in their lives, that's happening too. So you can kind of see how other people see that person. You know, being honest with the patient and discussing these things, the idea is that the person will then, you know, be able to integrate the different parts and the way that they see themselves and other people, and just have a lot more of a solid, integrated, you know, sense of themselves and other people.
You know, as we're talking about all these different therapies, I think what's really what you think you mentioned this, like they all get us to the same place. And I think if you're watching this and you're trying to figure out, you know, what you should try, I mean, I don't know if Alex, if you have any specific thoughts, but like, at least for me, I feel like I hear a lot of similarities, through all of these different therapies, and a lot of it just sort of seems to do with like the I don't know,
same destination, different roads.
Yeah. If you hear a different therapy, like described, you just try the ones that like resonate with you the most. Like what ones make the most sense to you? Like for me, I really liked DBT because I am already a chronic overthinker, to the point where I was just getting stuck in the weeds of like, if I just know enough, I'll be different. I try too hard to outthink situations. So for me, DBT was really helpful because it was like, no, let's focus on the skills. Like here's an actionable thing, 1, 2, 3. But, you know, not everyone is like that.
There's more research to be done on figuring out which treatments are best for who, whether it's personality traits, whether it's on symptoms. Like I have my own personal belief that I think for people who are highly suicidal, that DBT would be a really good first step, because if you're highly suicidal and you're going into something like Schema therapy, like Raf talked about how hard it can be, you know, it's like, it's not giving you the tools to deal with that. It's like, here's all the hard things about your life. And it's not maybe the most helpful thing in that moment when you're really suicidal. So there's more research to be done, but like what Xannie said too, it's what you feel like might be most helpful for you. You know, there's no book that tells you which treatment you should do. There will be. Maybe I'll write that book.
The other thing that is important too is that like BPD does rarely occur by itself. Like most people who have BPD also have some other co-occurring disorder. So that can also influence how effective certain treatments are. And some of those, you know, depending on how damaging some of those other co-occurring disorders might be, you know, the order of the way that you attack them might be different. You know, like I actually think it's kind of exciting that there are all these different things you could try, because it's not even just that there are different things, but at different points in your life, you come to different therapies with different experiences at different points in your life, and that totally changes how you see things. You know, one of the things that I felt really helped me with my therapeutic experience was that I started DBT at the same time that I started getting a degree in psychology. And I'm not saying that like everyone should go get a psychology degree to like, you know, deal with your issues, but I do think that there are a lot of classes that are worth just watching videos about. I mean, one of the most impactful courses that I ever took on psychology was learning and memory, because it helped me to understand some of the ways in which I picked up behaviors that maybe weren't taught in a really explicit way. It helped me to understand why things like exposure therapy work. If I hadn't taken that class and understood why and how exposure helps you deal with some of the trauma, I would have thought, oh, this is woo-woo, I'm not going to do it. And so I do, you know, there is something to be said for understanding some of the underlying principles and how some of the things in your body and your mind work. It made it a lot easier for me to take therapy seriously when I understood some of those other things.
It's interesting because a lot of the stuff that I've learned along the way are things that you guys are talking about, such as like challenging my negative thought patterns and challenging other people's intentions, you know. all of that is stuff that I've just learned over time through life lessons or meditating. I think, like, for me, that was the most helpful thing, is just challenging my negative patterns and my negative thoughts, and also realizing not everything is about me when it comes to other people's behaviors and reactions.
Based on everything we've said, I mean, it's clear that there's a lot of effective treatments. Research shows that these treatments are almost even equally effective for some people. So it really is shows that it's one destination, multiple roadways, multiple pathways. So it's just different ways of all getting to the same place. And it really is just about finding whatever is best for you.
Yay! Well, I'm excited. This is such a shift from when I was first diagnosed, when they were like, good luck!
Right.
There's nothing for you! Now there's so many options, and I just think that it's great. Overwhelming a little bit, but great. There are a lot of different ways. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Hopefully you have some ideas on different things that you can try on your recovery journey. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so that you do not miss a single episode. Next week, we will be back talking about BPD stigma. So tune in, and we will see you then. Bye.
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 Take it off.